This is episode 17 of The Winner's Circle, a drag racing podcast. I'm your host, Leroy Leese. Our goal is to help you win more rounds at the track by sharing tips and tricks. This is episode 17, brought to you by DragTracker.com, an online logbook serving the racing community through tools and technology. For this episode, we're going to cover DA, or density altitude, what it is and why you care. But before we dig in, I want to encourage you to check us out at DragTracker.com. You can drop me a line on the contact page, or you can also feel free to leave a comment about this episode at dragtracker.com/podcast. If you click on episode 17, you'll find links and notes from the show. Finally, we put out a YouTube version of every episode, and if you want to leave a comment there, feel free. We usually are pretty responsive. Recently, our podcast has been appearing on Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and SoundCloud. So there are many ways, more ways than ever, to get to this information. Let's talk about the weather. What is going on with the weather? Well, in simplest terms, for those of us running naturally aspirated race engines, we care how much oxygen is in the air. If there's more oxygen in the air, the fuel will burn more efficiently. And that makes for more power. When the air is dense, but it's full of moisture, there may be more oxygen, but there's also more water, which works against the efficiency of the engine in two ways. The first way being that it is taking the place where oxygen would be, and so therefore there's less oxygen and it's not as efficient, as well as the fact that it's moisture or water. It's actually negating the efficiency of burning the oxygen when it's ignited by the spark. When the air is dense but there's low humidity, that means there's an opportunity for more oxygen to be in the air. Now, if the temperature is high, oxygen is not as prevalent because it actually takes up more space because it's more active. If it's a cooler temperature, it's denser and less active. It takes up less space. Therefore, you can fit more oxygen molecules into the space of the volume of air that's going into the engine. Now, if you're not carbureted to take advantage of the increased oxygen, you may not see much of a performance increase. But a lot of times people will see performance increases and they'll change their jetting later in the evening as the air gets cooler. The pressure goes up slightly. That's why a lot of times you'll see cars adjusting their dial-in and going down as the night wears on at your average bracket race. If you have low pressure with high humidity, that is absolutely the worst for the engine. It's starving for air, good oxygen air, and if there's humidity, it's working against it again for the reasons we talked about with fuel just not burning as efficiently. So that's sort of how the weather, as far as your engine goes, is working for you or against you. Now, we have this thing that we call density altitude, which a lot of people refer to as the DA. How's the DA today? If the number is only ever calculated one time and never used again, it's really not useful. Density altitude, what it'll get you is when you come back week to week at a track, or even if you change tracks, now you can start to compare, well, when I ran this ET, it was this DA. And how does that compare to today's DA? Or whatever race day you're on. And in fact, when you're at the same track over the course of a weekend, like at an NHRA or IHRA event, where it lasts a couple of days, If you've raced in different DA or weather conditions, when you get up to the starting line and it's first thing in the morning on Sunday morning, or if it's a late Saturday night and you haven't run for a number of hours, you can look at the weather, and instead of looking at three variables, that being barometer, temperature, and humidity, you can look at one number, which is this DA, and compare it and start to get a handle on what the predicted ET of the car will be. Now, there's lots of software and weather station equipment that can help you make that prediction, but the point is that it's great to just have one variable, that DA variable that you store along with your runs instead of having humidity, temperature, and barometer. Although, as part of the DragTracker logbook, we store all four. Another thing that's interesting to note is that when you look at the Weather Channel and you see a barometer number, and it'll usually be 29, 30, 31. It's usually in that range. That is what we call a corrected barometer. And so that means if you were to stay in that area, it's a number that is relative and makes sense. But if you're in Denver, Colorado, which is above sea level, mile high, you are going to see on your Weather Channel numbers that are in the 29s and 30s. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably more like 25 or 26. I haven't looked, so forgive me if you're in that area and I'm way off. I'm just saying the number is relative to where you are. It's called a corrected barometer. So when you're measuring barometer for drag racing, you want to make sure you're using a non or uncorrected number, because you want to know what the air quality really is. And you want to compare it based on what it is at sea level. So density altitude gives you a number that represents how dense the air is compared to perfect weather at sea level. So that's roughly 60 degrees, 30% humidity, 29.92 on the barometer. If you were at sea level and had those conditions, your DA would be about 0. And so we compare that then when I go to my local track, which is 600 feet above sea level, give or take, and then I look at weather conditions that are happening any given weekend in the summer, it might be 1,100 feet. And so what that means is the weather that is currently in the atmosphere could be related to being at 1,100 feet above sea level if it were compared to perfect air. And so that's why it's important to use non-corrected values, because if you were to take that then to Denver or New Mexico or someplace that's at high altitude, you want to know that the air is accounting for the fact that you've changed altitude, right? And so if you use non-corrected values, it will automatically do that for you. And so a number that you might see there might be 5,000 or 6,000 feet above sea level. I've also raced at tracks where the air was so bad that it was 3,000 feet or 3,000 DA. And that was in the heat of the summer. There may have been a storm system coming in. And at the same track, in the October or early April months, DAs would be below sea level. So they would be in the negative values for DA. And that's really interesting. And you can't really compare those two runs, right? You start to completely change your tuning. You're adjusting jetting, accounting for either the richness or the leanness of the conditions that the air is actually causing. And if you weren't paying attention to that, you can imagine that if you showed up at the track and the DA turns out to be 3,000 feet and you weren't aware, your car's going to be off possibly by a quarter of a second. And you're going to think, what in the world has happened to my hot rod? I got to take it back. We got to start thrashing. You wouldn't have any clue. When the clue is the weather's just terrible and it's really affecting the car, and you can account for it. Now, if you were off by more than that, you could start to look into it and go, well, how much is the DA affecting my ET, and how much is it really something else? Now, you don't waste your time chasing something that either isn't a big problem or is a big problem. You know, if the DA hasn't fallen off, but your car has, well, it might be time to look into it. You've got something going on. So one thing that we did with DragTracker is we set it up so that there's a similar weather report. It's called the top 20 runs similar to current local weather. And if you look on the menu, it just says similar weather. But what that means is it's going to look at the current weather conditions, calculate the DA at your home track, and then give you a report with every run that has similar DA values. So give or take 100 feet. It's going to show you, or actually it's going to start at what the current DA is and then deviate from it as much or as little as is appropriate to get 20 runs. But that report can be super helpful if you print it out before you go, or even if you bring it up while you're at the track. Just adjust your home track to be whatever track you're at, and then you can see very quickly all the runs that were made in similar weather conditions. And that'll tell you if you've never raced at that track before, but you're seeing unusually fast or unusually slow times, compare them to runs made at other tracks in a similar weather scenario. And what I love the DA because it tells you, it gives you an apples to apples sort of comparison. If I had to compare or graph out the barometer specifically versus humidity and how that affected mile per hour and ET, it could be maddening. It might be hard to find a correlation, but the fact that we've taken all these numbers, combined them into one value, now I can really go ET, DA, where are we at? Another thing I've noticed is that if you were to Google or look on Wikipedia for density altitude, you're going to find some pretty intense calculations that are related to pilots and basic atmospheric type stuff. We've tried to simplify some of that. Frankly, looking at it, I got it just seemed a little bit over my head. I don't know fluid dynamic theories, and I'm just a guy here trying to race. So I would recommend, if you want to look at it, look at it. If you understand it, more power to you. I didn't get everything I saw there, but we did have, my dad and I developed a density altitude calculator that we found mapped really well to bracket racing and ETs. And so the calculator is what we have on the website. You can get to it at, just search for the DA calculator at DragTracker.com, and you can enter in the values and immediately calculate the DA for wherever you're at. I think you can also do that through Drag Times, and I think they have an app, so that's super helpful too if you need to go that route. And then any of our the software packages out there, especially the Weather Station, they'll give you that information as a density altitude number that you can write down and log. We found that ours is pretty accurate. We had some racers have used our DA paging system, which texts or emails you weather conditions while they're happening. And so you can set that up to get it on race day. And what was great about that is we've had, like I said, racers who have used it and verified it with other racers at the track that our numbers that we were sending were accurate. So you can have some peace of mind that you kind of are up on what the weather is doing. And that's helpful because if you were in the staging lanes and there's been an oil down, and you're wondering how the weather's changing, you haven't had a chance to get back to the trailer, if the weather is changing, you'll get a notification either via email or text, depending on how you've set it up. And now you can be on top of changing weather conditions. And that's what it's all about, right? Is having information to know what to change. If you need to change your dial in now, the air's getting better, or if you know that your car doesn't get affected by 100 plus or minus feet of change, then you can have some peace of mind and not be worried about it, right? It's all about having the most information. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it was useful to get some deeper understanding on what density altitude represents, how we use it in drag racing, why it's important to log it along with your other runs so that you have that information. Again, not only can you tell if your car has got a problem, a performance issue, but you can also then predict your ET better. So I talked about earlier. I talked about some of the new venues we're on. We're on Stitcher Radio. We're on we've been on YouTube. We're also on Google Play. I'm very excited to see our podcast there, and we're also spinning up SoundCloud, a stream there. So check out the playlist and download us at your leisure. I like the SoundCloud platform because you can leave comments at different points during the track. So if you had a question or a comment specifically about some point I've made during an episode, you can leave that comment right there on the track, and you can do it from a mobile device or from your desktop. So it's super handy. So check out SoundCloud.com and you can find us there. You can also find the WFO radio podcast, which is great. Lots of great interviews with NHRA drivers and just some interesting insights into the sport of drag racing. But other than that, I'm looking for topics. I've got a couple more lined up that I'm going to be releasing very soon. And but if you have something that you're interested in, I'll do my best. The sport's really been changing. We've been doing this podcast for a couple years, and even in these couple of years with street outlaws and so the sport's been getting some different kinds of publicity. Drag strips have been changing some of the programs they're running, and so we're trying to adjust and figure out how all the different programs all over the country are running. And so anyway, I just say that as sort of a caveat that if I say something that doesn't sound right for what you've seen at your track, just let me know. I'm interested to find out what everybody's up to and to share the information so that we can all be racing, smarter and winning. Well, if you get a chance, feel free to rate us on iTunes. That helps us get higher in the rankings so that we can be visible to other drag racers. I think that our biggest competitor is still RuPaul, so it's really not the same genre. But if you search for Drag Race, we're right there. And anyway, it would be great to kind of stand out from that audience as the premier drag racing podcast, and we'd love your help to get there. Check us out on YouTube, like I said. Feel free to email me, podcast@dragtracker.com. And so I think that wraps this up. Again, this was episode 17. And hey, race safe, race to win, and take care.